In the broadcasting world, there are many styles of presenting techniques. These techniques vary depending on what kind of role the presenter has. The roles we will be investigating today are news presenters, broadcast journalists, lifestyle programme presenters, documentary presenters, radio DJs, and chat show hosts. The most important things to focus on when talking about broadcasting techniques are verbal and visual. Let's begin with news presenters. An example of a news presenter is Nagamon Chetty, an English journalist who regularly presents BBC One's BBC World News and BBC Breakfast. One of the verbal techniques news presenters have to have is using correct terminology and pronunciation. This is because they have to talk a lot and say a lot of things that perhaps others would not know how to pronounce, such as names or scientific terms. But they have to ensure they get them correct so they do not offend anyone or embarrass themselves live on TV. News presenters do not typically use slang words unless quoting something or the news broadcast is aimed at an audience where slang would connect them, for example MTV, which is aimed at mostly teenagers. Not using slang would reflect their responsibility to remain professional with the words they use and so their audience understands. It is important that news presenters have an authoritative tone of voice when they speak, so they show they are serious about what they are telling you. Sometimes news channels can have guests speaking, and this is another reason why the presenter has to be authoritative, as they have to be in control of the conversation as they are working to a timescale. Despite the need to be authoritative, they do not use condescending language. A lot of presenters use a conversational voice when talking to the camera, as if they are talking to a friend, as this creates a better relationship with the audience because the reporter sounds like he or she is engaging in a personal conversation with the viewer. An essential part of a news presenter role is to give value and meaning to the words they use. They do this by putting on emphasis on key words by changing the pitch and tone. To stress certainty and convey a more serious tone, presenters lower their voice. The pace of speaking varies on what the mood of the story is. For example, talking quickly portrays an excited tone and talking slowly portrays a more serious tone. It is important that they do not talk too quickly so the audience can understand them, but not too slowly because that might sound boring. Remember that news reporters only get one chance to present their message to the viewer, whereas if the viewer was reading a newspaper, they could just go over it again. The verbal techniques news reporters use is suitable for their target audience. BBC Breakfast, for example, is aimed at adults, so the language they used would reflect this. The other main focus is visual techniques. The dress and appearance of news presenters reflect their professionalism. On shows such as Channel 4 News, the presenters will wear professional attire such as a suit and tie. There are some cases where the attire will be more casual, for example, BBC's 60-second news broadcast and MTV News. This is because they are, in general, much more casual. 60 seconds is very short, therefore the effort that is put into their attire reflects this. And MTV is aimed at mostly teenagers or young adults, so smart attire would not be appealing. The body language that is used in news presenting is a way to connect with the audience and emphasise certain stories. News reporters need to make their audience comfortable. They do this by smiling, engaging with them, and using their arms and hands in a natural way, looking into the camera, demonstrating authority by using small and stiff gestures and showing their confidence. In some cases, on set, news reporters can walk around to accompany speech, but usually they are either seated or standing. The facial expressions of news reporters have to be appropriate for the story they are presenting to show empathy and understanding. Almost always, a news report is set in a studio to fit the target audience and look professional, but sometimes, MTV for example, they can be outside and walking around. Broadcasting journalism links into news presenters, as during the news report there are clips to the broadcast journalist on scene of where the story is. Therefore, the verbal and visual techniques of a broadcast journalist are very similar. They have to do extensive amounts of research into the subject matter by collecting, verifying and analysing information to be presented. Similar to news presenters, broadcasters put emphasis on words to give them meaning and create a certain tone to clearly point out the key facts. Sometimes broadcast journalists have to interview people on set. It is important that they get the necessary information out of them, but ensuring the interviewee is at ease and they have established a rapport with them. For some journalists, this is a hard task. To make the interviewee feel comfortable, broadcast journalists show a genuine interest in what they have to say and focus on being more of a listener rather than a talker, while remaining alert for information to pursue. The language they use is suitable for their target audience. For example, CBBC News Round is aimed at young people, so the type of language they use will be understandable and simple, whereas 5 News would use more complex language with correct terminology. An authoritative voice needs to be used by broadcast journalists so that people are more likely to listen and believe what they are saying. When the journalist is on set, there may be interferences such as loud noises, disruptive people, or connection problems. Journalists should always be prepared for this and maintain clear speaking and adjust to each situation. The language used is quite illustrative, as they will be describing the scene. For example, the background has happened there, so the audience get a detailed explanation. Depending on what kind of story the broadcast is reporting on, the pace of delivery will usually be quite quick and simple, as they are the extra part to a news story that is already being told by a news reporter on set. This means that they will speak fast, but not too speedy with minimal breaks, as that will negatively impact on the understanding of the message, but not too slow, as that will negatively affect the listener's attention. The average between the two of these varies depending on the message. There is usually a consistent conversation that happens between a news presenter and a news broadcaster. More information will need to be found out, but due to the connection, there may be a slower response from the broadcaster. Both have to adjust to this and allow one another to finish their sentences so it does not become a rambled mess. Next is lifestyle program presenters. Examples of this are cooking, health, fashion, and home improvement shows. Lifestyle presenters use their own personal language as a way of connecting and engaging with their audience, and usually do not noticeably read off a script. However, the speech may be planned. It is important for them to use correct terminology to show they know what they are talking about, as their audience is more than likely watching for the tips and lifestyle advice they are giving, so they must sound trustworthy. As the presenter is using their own language, this will probably include slang and catchphrases, along with paraphrasing and being chatty. This is because the show is much more casual than something that is on the news. The language that is used is illustrative, as they will be describing things to the audience a lot. The visual techniques lifestyle presenters have depend on what the programme is about. The attire that is worn is appropriate for the show. For example, in a health show, the doctors will be wearing professional doctors' outfits, but if it was a gardening show, they would be wearing gardening clothes. Hand gestures would be used throughout to put emphasis on what they are saying, connect with the audience, and give a casual vibe. The facial expressions would be as appropriate for the show and the context. Most lifestyle presenters are on location. For example, gardening shows will be outside in a garden, and cooking shows they will be in a kitchen. Lifestyle presenters can also travel around a lot on camera to different locations. Documentary presenters will be the next one we talk about. A lot of documentaries are with just a voiceover. This voiceover may be from an iconic figure, for example, David Attenborough and Stephen Fry. The reason why iconic figures do voiceovers is because their voices are recognisable without looking at their faces, and people are more likely to watch a documentary with someone who is famous. Like the rest of the presenters, documentary presenters use correct terminology when explaining what is going on. These presenters tend to ask a lot of questions like, what would they do next? Or what would you do in this situation? To relate to the audience. Their tone of voice will be appropriate for the theme. For example, an investigatory documentary will be stern and unsympathetic, and a wildlife documentary will be calm and interested. With documentaries that are made with just a voiceover, they will be consistently talking and explaining while pausing at tense moments so the audience can focus more on what's happening on screen. They are at a good planned pace at which they talk, so it is neither too quick or too slow, so the audience remains interested and doesn't get confused. When there is an on-screen presenter, they tend to move around a lot, interview people, and use hand gestures to emphasise what they are saying and connect with the audience. Their attire will usually be casual, as filming a documentary can take weeks, and there may be a lot of travelling involved, so casual is more appropriate. Next is radio DJ. Verbal techniques are extremely important for radio DJs, as there are no visuals to go along with them, so all the focus is on their voice. Depending on the type of radio show, the ratio from talking and actual music playing varies. The genre of music depends on who the radio station is for. For example, older people will like different songs than the younger generation. Depending on who the target audience is, there may or may not be use of slang and catchphrases. If the audience is younger, there will be use of slang that is appropriate. The voice of the radio DJ is usually recognisable personality's voice. The DJ connects with the audience by asking questions and having phone-ins. Some radio DJs do ramble while conversing with guests, but it can still be entertaining. They have to know at least a little bit about the music they are playing. They use a friendly tone of voice to appeal to their audience, and the context is in a studio. Lastly, we'll be talking about chat show hosts. Presenters of chat show hosts are usually famous personalities, so they gather more of an audience. They can ask some hard-hitting questions depending on the type of chat show it is. For example, if it's a serious talk show or if it's just for entertainment. Sometimes catchphrases and slang are used depending on the theme. Usually chat show hosts interview people to find out information about a certain topic or celebrity, so the host does things to make the interviewee feel more comfortable in the hopes of getting information out of them. They use friendly yet persistent language. Regardless of what the chat show host is about, the attire that is worn is almost always smart. The setting is usually in a relaxed environment such as a sofa. For example, The Ellen Show. A lot of hand gestures are used and facial expressions while walking around on set. There may be some tea or coffee on the table in front of the guests to make them feel comfortable and like they are at home. Illustrative language is used to show emphasis on certain things. Sometimes there are clips inserted to show things such as movie cutaways or viral videos. Chat show hosts are working to a time schedule, so it is important that they have a good pace of delivery so it finishes on time. The context is in a studio with a live audience.